Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to break down the fight against chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. And it's a really complex and honestly fascinating world when you look at how treatment is evolving. So, we're going to start with a pretty heavy question, because when we talk about COPD, the stakes are just incredibly high. This isn't some minor issue. It's a massive global health problem that impacts millions of people and, whole healthcare systems. Yep, third. COPD is the third leading cause of death on the entire planet. And that really reframes it, doesn't it? It's so much more than a smoker's cough. This is a life-threatening disease, which makes finding better ways to treat it an absolute global priority. So, to really get a handle on the treatment, we have to start where every single patient starts, with the diagnosis itself. At its core, COPD is really an umbrella term for lung diseases like emphysema and chronic bronchitis. The big, defining feature is that it limits your airflow, making it harder and harder to breathe over time. But the most important word on this slide? Treatable. That's key. Now, this looks super technical, but the way a diagnosis is confirmed is actually pretty specific. A doctor gives you a puff from an inhaler, and then you do a breathing test called spirometry. It measures two things: the total amount of air you can blow out, that's FVC, and how much of that air you can get out in the very first second, that's your FEV1. If that ratio, FEV1 over FVC, is less than 0.7, well, that's the clear, definitive line. That's a COPD diagnosis. Okay, so once that diagnosis is in hand, what's in the doctor's arsenal? The way we fight COPD is about a lot more than just handing someone a single inhaler. It's a whole strategy. The main goals are pretty clear, right? You want to help people feel better day to day, prevent those really dangerous flare-ups, and just generally improve their quality of life. But look at the foundation. Before you even get to the meds, the two most powerful things a patient can do are often quitting smoking and going through pulmonary rehab. Now, this right here shows the typical playbook for inhaled medicines. It's what we call a step-up approach. Don't worry about all the acronyms just yet. We'll get to them. The idea is simple. You start with one type of medicine to open the airways. If that's not enough, you add a second one. And for patients who are getting a lot of those flare-ups, you add a third drug, an inhaled steroid, to create what's known as triple therapy. And here's the breakdown of those tools. Those LAMAs and LABAs we just saw, those are bronchodilators. Their job is to relax the muscles around the airways to make breathing easier. The ICS is an anti-inflammatory, which helps reduce swelling. And then there's this newer class, biologics, which are these super targeted drugs that go after very specific sources of inflammation. But here's where the thinking is really starting to shift. A one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't cut it anymore. We're realizing COPD is a super varied disease, and doctors are now starting to use biomarkers to make the treatment much more personal. And one of the biggest game changers is something called the eosinophil count. It's a type of white blood cell you can measure with a simple blood test. If your count is high, it's a huge signpost for a specific kind of inflammation. And we now know for sure that those patients get a massive benefit from adding that inhaled corticosteroid, the ICS. If the count is low, well, that steroid just doesn't do nearly as much good. This number really shows you how powerful that is. For patients with those high eosinophil counts, you only need to treat about 9 of them with triple therapy to prevent one major flare-up over the course of a year. That is a huge, huge impact. Now, compare that to the patients with low counts. You'd have to treat more than 46 people to get that exact same benefit to prevent just one single flare-up. The difference is just staggering, and it's the perfect example of why finding the right drug for the right patient is the future. This is what personalized medicine is all about. So knowing the right treatment is one thing, but actually getting it is a whole other story. Let's talk about the gauntlet that pretty much every patient has to run: cost and access. You have to understand this term WAC, because it's the official starting point for a drug's price. The best analogy is the sticker price on a car. It's the official number on the window, but almost nobody actually pays that price once all the negotiations and discounts are done. And just to give you an idea of how high that sticker price can get, the projected WAC for one new drug in the pipeline is over $35,000 a year. But then you have this. In a really big shift, a lot of the big drug companies have now capped what patients have to pay out of pocket for their inhalers at just $35 a month. This was a direct response to a ton of public pressure on making these things more affordable. So you have this huge gap, right?
between the $35,000 list price and the $35 copay? Who manages that? The answer is these incredibly powerful middlemen called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. They're the ones negotiating for insurance companies to decide which drugs get covered and at what price. And PBMs have a few key tools in their playbook to keep costs down. They might put a drug on a higher tier, which means you have a higher copay. Or they might require something called step therapy, where you have to try and fail on a cheaper drug first. Or they might demand your doctor get prior authorization before they'll agree to cover a pricier medication. All of these things have a direct impact on what medicine you can get and how quickly you can get it.
All right, so for our last section, let's look to the horizon. Where is this whole fight against COPD headed, and what are the big challenges that we still have to overcome? Even with this amazing arsenal of treatments, there are still major unmet needs. A lot of patients still get flare-ups, even when they're on the best possible therapy. And then there's this shockingly simple but huge problem. Studies show that up to half of all patients use their inhalers the wrong way, meaning they aren't even getting the full dose of their medicine.
The good news, though, is that the research pipeline is really exciting. You've got drugs like ensifentrine, which has this cool dual action that both opens the airways and fights inflammation. And then there's itepekimab, which is a biologic that targets what you could call a master switch for inflammation in the lungs. That could potentially help a ton of patients, no matter what their eosinophil level is. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the ultimate goal. The whole focus of research is shifting. We're moving away from just managing symptoms day to day. The real holy grail, the new frontier, is disease modification, finding therapies that could actually slow down the lung damage and change the entire long-term course of COPD. So this all leaves us at a really fascinating crossroads. On one hand, you have the science pushing us towards these incredibly personalized, biomarker-driven treatments. And on the other hand, you have the economics of healthcare shifting, with more focus on affordability. So the big question is, can these two massive forces finally come together to create a future where the treatment for COPD is truly and finally personal for every single patient?